Hello, everybody. Welcome to another new episode of Cinemacast, the movie review podcast right here on our YouTube channel, Arrow Entertainment. If you have yet to do so, hit that like and subscribe button down below if you enjoy our content. You're also watching us on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ArrowENT. Also, if you guys like following us for our podcasts and game streams, be sure to follow us on the other platforms as well. Also down below, we are on TikTok. If you want to follow us on TikTok, link for that is down below, as well as our social media and Discord. So, let's get into today's feature. Now, when it comes to psychological horror, there's a lot of people out there that get it, and there's a lot of people that don't, because psychological horror can be confusing at times. There could be a lot of confusing plot points, a lot of subplot points. Even the story can be a mixed mesh of things. There's a lot of good movies out there that are very psychological, and it's all about paying attention to what the plot is. And sometimes you can get sucked into the plot to the point to where you don't even remember what's really going on, or something happens and you're forcing yourself to go back to a certain point in the movie where you're like, oh, or oh, it's something that plays with your heads. It plays with how you view the movie, how you get infused with the main character, how you feel about the main character. Is the main character going to make it out alive? Is something going to happen to them in a certain way? Like, that's what happens with this movie, Smile 2. Now, I haven't done a review yet for the movie Smile, which came out in 2022. But let me tell you something. When it comes to horror movies like this, it's very rare for a movie like this to give anybody any true scares or feelings of being terrified. But when it comes to these movies, yes, there can be some jump scares, and then there's other times where something's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it's going to pop up, or even if it does pop up. And that's how this movie is. Even though this is a sequel, and you probably will want to go back and watch the first one, because they are sort of connected in a way, but only for a few minutes. And the entity in this movie, yes, this is a psychological, supernatural horror film. The entity in this film is a very interesting one. This is something that a lot of people have not seen in so long. And there's only very few films that have used an unseen entity that haunts an individual. For example, there's a movie titled It Follows, where an entity is just running around, basically, that nobody sees except for the victim. And the only way that it's passed on from victim to victim is if they have sex with an individual. So let's say you, who are a man, are being followed by this entity, and you want it to disappear. The only way to make it disappear is if you have sex with a woman, or maybe another man, depending on if you're gay or you're straight or whatever. You have sex with that person, and then the entity passes on to them, and then they got to pass it on, and so forth and so forth, until that person dies, and then the entity returns back to its original person. It's a very interesting plot, but however, that movie was pretty terrifying in a sense. It was one film that it kind of did freak me out a little bit, but I did enjoy it. I watched it a few times. It's a really good movie. It's It Follows. It's definitely something of that nature, that it definitely takes a genre and it puts a twist on it, and it just blows people out of the water. And that's what these movies do with Smile. And the first Smile, it was pretty terrifying in a sense that you're wondering, what is this entity? Where did it come from? Why is it haunting said person? Now, the first one, it followed a woman, basically. That's what it did. And this movie picks up at least, and I will say this is a spoiler alert before I get into this movie. This is a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the first film, or if you haven't seen either of these, go back, watch them both, and then come back. But this film takes place 6 days after the events of the first movie. So this takes place basically right after the events of the first movie. So there is a continuation between these movies. Now, it doesn't do a whole lot to mention a lot of the people or a lot of the characters from the first film, but let's just say, this entity continues on through certain people that were attached to the end of the first film. So, this movie, which is a sequel to the first one, stars a young Naomi Scott, who plays a pop star who begins to experience a series of increasingly disturbing events just as she is about to embark on tour. Yes, she is a pop singer in this film. Now, when I went into this movie, I was like, okay, this is going to be about somebody who's famous, pop star, fame's going to her head or whatever. But let me tell you something. That plays a very interesting theme along with what's going on in this movie. In times, now, I haven't seen these movies. There's an original and there's a remake for these movies called Suspiria. I believe that's what it is. It's called Suspiria. Let me look that up real quick. Suspiria. Yes, there is a 1977 supernatural horror film by Dario Argento named Suspiria. And that film follows a star, follows a star, Jessica Harper, as an American ballet student who transfers to a prestigious dance academy, but realizes after a series of murders, the academy is a front for a coven of witches. Now, a movie like that and its reboot is all about witches. This movie has nothing to do with witchcraft, but the theme of the movie, especially following a young female front who is going through being in the limelight, somebody who is a star, to say, who is dealing with her own emotions, who is dealing with a very troubled past, which is what this character is doing. And then all of a sudden, this entity that she knows nothing about attracts itself to her in a particular way. And it becomes attached to her, and it begins to drive her into madness over a course of a few days. Now let's go on to a little bit more about the film before we talk about the synopsis a little bit. And I'm not going to get too much into detail because I want you guys, the viewers, to get into this movie. I want you to see not only this film, but the first film to get a feel for it, because I feel like the first film sets you up for something terrifying and really, really good. And this film takes it up a notch in themes. So in March 2023, following the commercial success for the first film, Parker Finn, who is the director and the writer of these films, signed a first look deal with Paramount Pictures to develop additional horror projects. In the following April, the sequel to Smile has entered pre-production, as Finn returning as writer and director. This movie was released theatrically in the United States October 18th, 2024. Like its predecessor, the film received positive reviews from critics, with Scott receiving critical acclaim for her performance. And it's almost kind of a rarity in a sense, that movies come along with a sequel or a trilogy or whatever, and each movie in that entry franchise do very well for themselves. Keeping it at a particular grade when it comes to, the rating, when it comes to the critical reception. If we go back to the first Smile movie, when that came out, the reception for it it has an approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes of around 80%, with an average rating of 6.6 out of 10, which is still pretty good. It all depends on how you interpret the movie. Now, this one here took it up a notch with the rating system. It went up to 86% with a 6.9 out of 10 on an average rating. So it fares just a little bit better in terms of the story, the actors, the characters, the way the story is written, etc. Now, even though it did good at the box office, I'm pretty sure there are some reviewers here that did not care too much for it. Like with this one, okay. Benjamin Lee of The Guardian gave the film 3 out of 5 stars, rating. I'm not sure if Smile 2 really adds much to an experience that we don't already know, but it does make for a neat, well-utensiled setting for a horror film about losing one's mind. Variety's Owen said that the movie is hardly subtle, yet Parker Finn has become a clever enough filmmaker to make reality feel like a hallucination, and hallucinations feel like reality. Bilge Eberi of Vulture, I don't even know how to pronounce some of these foreign names, was more critical, writing, as Skye becomes increasingly unable to tell what's actually happening and what's a waking nightmare, we should feel more for her, and we should feel more with her. Instead, we lose interest as the whole thing becomes pointless and even a more cynical and cruel. The movie ultimately scuttles with its own ambitions. I really don't think that in in a sense. NME's James Mottram said, sadly, Smile 2 doesn't feel as fresh as its predecessor, partly because it borrows liberally from the films like Flatliners. In essence, this is just a rerun of the first film, just a slightly glitzier environment. Well, here's the thing. When you have a plot that carries over to a second film and you're interested in how the plot thickens, basically, with an entity that you cannot see or even remotely want to help the character with. I mean, why do you think it's called? It's basically a sequel, it still continues. It's something that continues over. It's just, it gives it a new character to work off of, and it gives it a little bit more to it to make it more suspenseful and to give it a little bit more oomph, if I could say so. So, this movie, like I said, follows Naomi Scott as a young pop star, Skye Riley, and she is prepared to make her comeback during a comeback tour following a public struggle with substance abuse and a car crash that killed her actor/boyfriend at the time. So already this is a character who is dealing with some real darkness in her life. She's struggling with being a recent drug addict who is receiving help for that, and she was in a car accident. Now, the car accident, it's not too gruesome, but I guess it is gruesome in a sense. But you do see it in a flashback sometime later during the movie. So I will say that as a little spoiler, you do see a glimpse of what happened during the car wreck, in a sense, and how the whole thing happened. So you do see little glimpses. They happen as like nightmare periods, I would call them. There's periods in the movie where she has a nightmare. Now, when it comes to hallucinations, with what the one critic say about hallucinations. Now, this film, it does a very tricky job with convincing you, the viewer, on whether what you're viewing is real or fake. That's what this film does. It does a whole lot to it. And there's a lot of movies out there within the last 50, 60, 70 years, possibly. There's a lot of films out there that are very psychological, that really make you think, did this really happen? Did that really happen? Take Christian Bale's film American Psycho, where you follow this businessman in New York who goes on a murderous spree at times. You see him murdering all these women and murdering some of his friends who are gay, and then come to find out in the end, did he really murder them, though? Did he murder these people? Or was it all a figment of his imagination? You don't know. All you know is you went through a roller coaster ride with this character, and you know you sense, okay, this is a murderous psycho. He's a serial killer. But then you find out in the end, it's like, well, I don't know. I don't think it really happened. And that's pretty much how these movies work. They take you for a roller coaster ride, only to find out maybe like toward the end of the film or halfway into the film, you're like, wait a minute, this didn't really happen, or that really happened? That's how this movie plays out. You got this girl, this poor girl. She is already struggling with dealing with the pressures of being a pop star. Her mother, who is played by Rosemary DeWitt, she's pressuring her really much, too much into doing certain things that will, help promote her, get ready for her tour, filming music videos and such, filming dance choreography, only for her to pretty much crack down. Now, there is a scene where a friend of hers, who is a drug dealer by the name of Louis Fregali, who witnesses an event at the beginning of the film, which of course takes place 6 days after the events of the previous film. So he is being followed by this entity, and you already know what's going on. She thinks this guy is freaking out because he was snorting cocaine right before she paid him a visit. But he is seeing this thing, and it ends up being he becomes possessed. You see him choking as if he were dying, and he's doing it right in front of her. So then he gets up in one particular scene, and she's already freaked out. She's wondering if he's okay, so he's sitting there. And next thing you know, you see this great big smile upon his face. Now, that is the theme of the movie, Smile. The entity that possesses somebody or is trying to possess somebody. All around you, with this entity following you, you will see people around you who have this big old smile. That is probably the most creepiest thing of the movie right there. If you think you're sitting with somebody who's, just normal, you're talking with them, and next thing you know, you find out that they're not who they are, and they begin smiling at you. That is probably the most terrifying thing of the movie, especially when it leads up to certain other scenes as well. But let's just say this one particular scene, he wakes up, he's smiling, and what this entity does, it follows you around, it descends you into madness. It stalks you. It terrorizes you. It makes you see and hear things for a matter of days before it decides it's going to possess you in a sense and kill you in a certain way. So that's what it did to this guy, Lewis, right in front of Sky. It possessed him, woke him up to the point where he grabbed an item, I'm not going to say what, and he began to bludgeon his face in until he died. And now you got an entity that's following poor Sky around throughout the rest of the film. And it's slowly driving her into madness. The people around her that she sees, that she interacts with, she's seen it all, but she's not too sure what to think of it. And then things start happening. And it's almost like, did this person actually do this? Did this person actually do that? So it's something that's kind of difficult to really describe in a sense with how this movie plays out. Not only for the characters in the film, but for you, the viewer, as well. Because you're getting hooked already on this girl, this young girl, who's going through the struggles with what she had dealt with, going through the struggles of fame. Her mother, has her forced into this. Her mother's like an agent to it. And all she's worried about is money, in a sense. But then you start seeing this girl's descent into madness. and you're really feeling for this girl, and you're hoping that she gets out of it. You hope that there's someone who can actually help her with it. But of course, in the end, everything just does a complete 180, and it's like, oh no, that didn't really happen. None of this really happened. And that's what this movie does. This movie does a lot of trickery with the audience. It does a lot of trickery with the plot, with the characters. So you can sit and you can Wikipedia, you can IMDb this movie, you can look up everything you can about this film. But let me tell you, I already gave you a little bit of synopsis, but that's all I want to give you. Because let me just say, to me, even though I never watched the movies Suspiria, I know the theme of the movies. I know what happens in the movies, in a sense. That's kind of how this movie has me set with the theme, you know, of this girl who's on the rise of fame and fortune, and everything just comes crashing down, you know. Like I said, she has a history of being a drug addict, a history of this and that, and she's recovering. Next thing you know, this entity, it comes barreling down on her, you know, descending her into madness deeper and deeper, and you follow her on this trip. You follow her on this trail, and you're hoping that she comes out of it. But then again, it does a complete 180, and it backtracks you, and you're like, wait a minute, what happened here? When did this happen? How did that happen? I don't want to say the movie is confusing. Now, if you're somebody like me who does pay close attention to movies, when you get really deep into it and you pay really close attention, everything begins to make sense, because you know that what's happening to this person is all in her head. So this movie is just one big mind game. And it leads up to a hell of an ending, which of course is setting up for a sequel. Yes, the future of this series. It was said with the way this movie ended, and I can already sense how a third movie will play out with how this movie ended. And it just ended on a banger. Let's just say that. Now, this past September, writer and director Parker Finn confirmed plans to continue the franchise with a third film, stating, "We've maybe only scooped a single glass of water out of the ocean. I think it's really fun to imagine the lineage of Smile movies, where each one becomes more off the rails than the previous one." In December, it was reported that Smile 3 was in the works and was set to start filming in 2025. But I will say, with his statement there, where each film becomes more off the rails than the previous one, that's what this movie did. The first movie, the first entry, was pretty off the rails for what it was. It gets you set up for something like, oh my god, I want more. This one, I feel it was more off the rails. There was a lot more going on with this one psychologically than the first one was. Like with this movie here, you really start to feel for the main character. You really start to feel for her, and it's just like everything continues one right after the other. It's a banger after a banger after a banger happening to this poor girl as she is descending slowly into madness, and it just worsens over time for her. And you're on this trip with her. You really feel for this girl, and it's almost like you want to help her, but you don't know how to help her, because every which turn that she takes, it's almost like every 5-10 minutes something is happening to this poor girl. So yeah, this is a hell of a roller coaster ride. If you haven't seen the first Smile, go check that out, and then check this one out. This movie definitely ups the ante. Not really in the scare factor, because people at this point are probably like, it is what it is. I'm not too scared of it, but there are some people out there that will freak out. And I think when it comes to the psychological, supernatural horror films, I think it plays more of a hit with the audiences than your typical creature features or your paranormal based movies, you know, where you got the boogeyman that oogie boogies in a bedroom and tries to eat the kid, you know. So a movie like this, where it's psychological and supernatural put together, and it's something that plays with them, and it's something that's very rarely experimented with nowadays when it comes to Hollywood movies. But I will say, like, you know, this director, he does a really good job with panning this movie out with its sequel. And these are the only two films that this guy's made. Looking at it, this guy was born in 1987. And he went to the University of Colorado Boulder, attended Chapman University Dodge College of Film and Media Arts. He did a couple of short films back in 2018, 2020. One of them was told, Laura Hasn't Slept. I ain't seen that one. It's a short. So I'm going to have to look that one up. Laura Hasn't Slept acts as the first film in Finn's full feature-length horror series, Smile. Okay. So this film is pretty much like a prequel to the movie Smile. It's a short film. I don't even know how long the movie is, but let's just say, okay, Nightmarish Conjurings does not recommend this film if you're having problems sleeping. Now I gotta see this movie. It's 11 minutes long. Now I gotta find it. Laura Hasn't Slept. But other than that, he only wrote and directed 2 films. And that was Smile and Smile 2. Now, Smile 2 was the one where he directed, wrote, and produced. He didn't produce the first one. He did produce the second one. So, it's a very good series of movies. This guy did a very good job with it. And let's see, in June 2024, it was reported that he would write and direct a remake to Possession. A remake of Possession, a 1981 psychological horror drama. I heard about that movie, Possession. I heard it was really fucked up. A really fucked up movie. So I can't wait to see that if he decides to make that. So this guy, he has a little fancy for the psychological horror, which is pretty cool. I think with movies like Smile, It Follows, and some others, I really do think the psychological, supernatural horror genre is finally making a good comeback, and it's very underrated. So if you are looking for a good scare, go to movies like this, you know, because let me tell you something. When you mix psychological, when you mix like the dreadful feelings of the character in the movie who's like, did I see what I see? Do I see what I think I've seen? Do I really hear that? Did I really experience that? And it's just so terrifying that I think the most terrifying thing when it comes to human existence is the brain. Because sometimes they say the brain can play tricks on you. The mind can play tricks on you. Did you really see that? Did you really hear that? Did you really experience that? Sometimes the mind can play tricks on you. And I think that plays an integral part in movies like this, where the scariest thing is, you know you saw something, or you think you know you saw something, but you really didn't. And that's what terrifies you, because you don't know what's around that corner. You don't know what's behind you. You don't know what's going to happen next when you turn your head. And I think that is probably the most terrifying aspect to include in a movie when it comes to psychological fear. And this movie does it very well. Like I said, go and watch both these movies. It's well worth it. What do I give Smile 2? I give Smile 2 an 8.5 out of 10, an 8.5 out of 10 for Smile 2. This was a really good psychological, supernatural horror film. I really did enjoy it. There's a lot to it that, like I said, you would have to really pay attention to this film. And if you want more of the lore, go back and watch the first movie. And that does it for today's episode of Cinemacast, guys. I would like to thank you guys for listening to me ramble on today about this movie, Smile 2. If you guys have stuck around and listened to the entire thing, make sure you leave a like and subscribe down below if you're watching us on YouTube. And if you're on other platforms, TikTok, Twitch, Kick, whatever, click the links down below. Come on over and follow us on there, especially our social media. And if you're on Discord and you want updates, or if you want to meet new people and have fun talking about movies, video games, and such, click the Discord link down below if you're on Discord and join our server today. Thank you for joining me today. Today's feature was Smile 2. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the review. Hope you guys checked out both these films. What did you think about it? Leave us a comment down below. And until next time, guys, we'll catch you right back here to cinema.